Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is XML, that is translating from XML strings into Python data structures and vice versa. In this lesson, we will not be deep diving into XML and all of the libraries that are available to learn about traversing an XML tree. That is something for another class, a full week's worth of lessons on that, and we're not going to be doing that. Rather, we're going to use this simple library, this package that I found called Xml To Dict, which will easily do translation from XML into Python and vice versa. So it's a fairly high level, following the same model that we did for JSON and YAML examination of doing XML translation to and from Python data structures. So hopefully it makes sense. Let's get started. So let's talk about XML now. XML is a lot different, certainly from JSON and from YAML also. XML is a language unto itself. It has tags, it has data, it has ways that you construct things. You could spend a week of all-day classes on XML in order to learn about using XML and all of the nuances. What I'm going to attempt to do in this lesson is to make it as simple as possible and also as similar to what we've done before. So that is what our intention will be. Now, in order to do that, I'm using this library or this package called XML To Dict. Basically, it will take XML data as long as it's formatted in a certain way, and it will convert it into dictionary items. And so that is what you're going to see here. There will be lists and dictionaries from this XML data. The way that you get it from XML into Python with this package is you do a parse, and the way that you get it from Python into XML is you use the unparse function. And so that's what we'll be doing when we look at the code. So let's walk through the code at a high level. What we're going to do is the same thing that we've done for JSON and for YAML. So we have inventory. Now I have a special inventory here. We'll look at that in a minute. That is different than the others. I needed to use this because of how XML works. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a file for writing, and I'm going to write out my data, this Python data, into the file. And then what I'm going to do is read it in. This is a little bit different. I'm actually doing the parse, so I'm getting it into this saved inventory right away, and then I print it out. You'll see why I do this a little bit later. Then I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to put in this dict constructor equals dict. That's going to cause us to do something slightly different. And then I print out the saved inventory. And from this point in time, all I'm really going to do that's important is I'm going to compare the inventory that I read back in, the inventory that I read back in to the one that we started with, and make sure that it is okay. So let's look at the output and then examine the code in a little bit more detail. So let's look at the output, and you'll see why I did what I did in terms of doing this type of parse, which is just the default, and then this type of parse where I say dict constructor equals dict. The first output that I print, which is right here, which is my first saved inventory, this is using an ordered dict. So basically what is happening when we do a parse is this library that we're using, XML To Dict, is going to store things in ordered dictionary. And so if you look at this data right here, you may rightly say, whoa, that is really confusing. I have no idea what's going on. I'm not going to spend the time explaining it to you because while I understand it reasonably well, it's not going to help you in any of the stuff that you do. It's better to think about it in this situation, which is where we say dict constructor equals dict. It will use a dictionary instead of an ordered dictionary. And when I do a pretty print, this is the data that it prints out. This is much more readable for you and I. I can say, okay, that's a dictionary. This is my key called inventory. This is another dictionary. The value is a dictionary. That's this device. And under device, I have a list. And this list is going to contain my two items right here, which one of them is going to be this device and the other one is going to be this device. So this is the way that I've gotten it into a reasonable Python data structure, and that is when I do this XML to Dict library, I'm using Dict constructor. Now let me just tell you, if you work in the world of XML, there are many different libraries that people use. They're very confusing for a new person until you immerse yourself in XML. So this is the easier, simpler way to do it that's more consistent with how we have done it before. And of course, at the very end, just to show you the output, it does work that the inventory that we read in, that saved inventory, is going to be exactly equal to the XML inventory that is in our module here, L00 inventory. Okay, so let's remind ourselves what we're talking about. Remember, we are talking about taking XML formatted data and translating it into Python data structures, and taking Python data structures and translating it into XML. What we did was we used this library that I installed called XML To Dict. It makes doing this translation much simpler. All I need to do is parse of this data, and I end up with Python data structures. And if I do an unparse, then it writes it out in this format. Now, there are a number of requirements in terms of the way that the data in XML is formatted. So you do need to adhere to that, but it does give you the basic functionality that we did before. When we looked at the code, we did fundamentally the same thing that we've done before, where we do writing of stuff out to a file. And in order to do that from Python into XML format, we do an unparse. We read it in. We did it a couple of times. You can see it highlighted both of these. We parsed it from what we read from that file. And the one thing that we noticed was if we did it without specifying this dict constructor parameter, then what we ended up with is ordered dictionary stuff, which doesn't compare as well as the regular dictionary, which is what we did there. We printed this stuff out and we compared it and made sure that it was the same. So that is XML. That's a simple version of XML. As I mentioned before, there are more complicated ways to do things, but I don't go through them in this tutorial. So hopefully that made sense. If not, as always, let me know, and thanks for listening.